Welcome to another Hollywood Bible study. As a creative person, what gods do you serve? It doesn't matter what kind of creative work you're doing in the arts, in business, academia, or government. You are serving one god or another, and maybe a whole pantheon of deities. What gods we serve control our lives. That's the subject of this study, given on the CBS Radford Studio Lot in 2010.
You know, we've been talking over months about Satan and the great lords of darkness and their deep influence on our world. And this influence has extended down through ancient history to our present day. And last month, we discussed their association with what the Old Testament calls the starry host. And that starry host has been worshipped in many forms, also down to our present time. And it was the Roman Catholic priest Malachi Martin, in his book, Hostage to the Devil, who picked up on a fact that I think is rarely perceived. These supernatural beings are evil, they're vicious, they're intelligent, they're powerful, they are also insane. And this is logical, because anyone who turns against God and turns against the love that God has, by definition, that is an insanity. Those of us who work in Hollywood or have worked here know that we understand this sort of self-destructive insanity, don't we? You can be intellectually brilliant, you can be physically gorgeous, you can be totally charming, and you can be evil and self-centered to the point of insanity. Now, if you've had any dealings with stars, I'll tell you, you can understand what I'm talking about. The fact that our culture worships people like this opens the door to all sorts of destruction and abusive leadership. With that in mind, I thought that tonight we should start by sharing a little bit of the wisdom of the Lords of Darkness, things that the Lords of Darkness would like to communicate to you. Isn't that a few golden drops just to give you an idea of their thinking? A number of years ago, I came across a book entitled The Bringers of the Dawn, Teachings from the Pleiadians. These entities chose a woman named Barbara Marciniak, and according to the jacket of the book, which I have with me tonight, they spent over 400 hours with channeling their words through Barbara, and they wrote this book, and their whole purpose, so they say, is to help us discover how to reach a new stage of evolution. So I thought, that we might start with a few morsels from the Pleiadians, and to give you an idea of the thinking that has gone on, I tell you, for thousands of years. This is in a more current form. Some words on the existence of God. God with a big G has never visited this planet as an entity. God with a big G is in all things. You have only dealt with gods with a little g who have wanted to be adored and to confuse you. About authority. We have said to you that your lesson is authority. To become your own authority and to stop giving over your decision-making process to governmental people or parents or teachers or gods. It is time for people of earth to become sovereign. About evil. The 3D world is headed for a collision of dimensions. Not a collision of worlds, a collision of dimensions. Many dimensions are going to come crashing into each other. Some of these dimensions may seem horrifying and very frightening. The test, the initiation, and initiation is always a means to move through another reality, to conquer it and transmute it, is to be faced with these energies and entities that seemingly are of incredible darkness, and to understand that they are coming to merge with you because they are you. They are part of your multidimensional self. And you are the standard bearer, and you are light. Dark will come to light. We define light as the promoting, dispensing, and sharing of information. Dark is the controlling and withholding of information. A different way of viewing the Garden of Eden, perhaps. The battle between light and dark doesn't really serve you. It is part of the separation story that keeps you confused. In actuality, they are simply aspects of individual souls taking different guises in conflict with themselves. You are battling yourself. The battle of light and dark and good and evil is only between portions of yourself. About Christ. An example of a holographic insert that was put on the planet in the past to change the course of history is the crucifixion of Christ. The drama that was played out and passed on historically to you is not the reality that the Christed one came to play. A version of this entity's life was molded and designed in a holographic entertainment movie, which was then inserted and played out as if it were real. Christ came in as a committee of beings over a period of time. Suddenly, that's the ultimate nightmare. Christ as a committee. This is jarring. About death. One of the most important ultimate realities upon this planet for you as a species to understand, and one of the greatest challenges you have been faced with, is what it means to die. We can convince you of many things, but it is difficult for us to convince you that you do not have to die. In this time, you do not have to physically leave your body behind here upon this planet. And you conceive of the idea that you will simply change the vibrational rate of your physical being and take your body with you because you will rearrange the molecular structure. About spiritual transformation. I love this. Another activity we recommend for those of you who wish to move into a vast acceleration of energy is spinning. Move from left to right, spinning around and focusing your vision on your thumb, counting and spinning. We recommend that you spin 33 times at least once a day. You may build up to the 33 spins very slowly. If you were able to work up to 33 spins 3 times a day so that you are spinning 99 times, well, we will see how long you stay on the planet, or at least in this dimension. Now, before we laugh too hard at this, remember the concept of the Islamic sect of the whirling dervishes. But if you all want to start spinning, we can just do that right now. Spinning class, yes. In the middle of all of this strangeness and craziness, suddenly you come upon this. If human beings do not change, if they do not make the shift in values and realize that without earth they could not be here, then earth in its love for its own initiation and its reaching for a higher frequency will bring about a cleansing that will balance it once again. There is the potential for many people to leave the planet in an afternoon. The people who leave the planet during the time of earth changes do not fit here any longer, and they are stopping the harmony of earth. The time comes that perhaps 20 million people leave the planet at one time. There will be a tremendous shift in consciousness for those who are remaining. When a large group passes over together, they create an impact upon the consciousness of those who remain. It is a fascinating tragedy that the powers of darkness believe more in the soon return of Jesus Christ than the people of His church. They believe in the removal of that church more than most Christians do. What a terrible condemnation upon all of us who claim to follow Jesus. I thought it would be good if we took just a moment and talked about where we've been and where we're going. Over these months, we've discussed in the broadest strokes the powerful forces, both human and supernatural, that are at work in our culture. We've taken a narrative approach to these things. We've talked about utilizing a presupposition, and the presupposition of this Bible study across everything is what has happened in the past is predictive of what will happen in the future. We speak about the kingdom of Hollywood as both a specific center of world culture and as a paradigmatic form of what the Bible calls the kingdom of this world. We also speak about Hollywood personally, because I've spent a lot of time in the kingdom of Hollywood, and so have many of you. And I'll tell you, we love the unrealized potential of this industry, and we love the people who are here. We'll spend several more evenings focused as we have been. And I'm afraid we're going to get much more controversial in the next couple of weeks, a couple of times that we're together. After that, we'll spend an evening on the death and resurrection of Jesus. We'll look at that wonderful and amazing event in some ways that perhaps you haven't considered. Then we will move into an examination of the kingdom of heaven. What is it? Where is it? What does it mean for our lives? Undergirding everything is our belief in the soon return of Jesus the King and the establishment of His kingdom in this world. In light of that reality, how should we be living every day? We left off last month by saying that in the days ahead there will be great manifestations of apparently miraculous power. All of these manifestations will be designed to prove the reality of a great lie, a lie of monstrous deception so huge that it will enslave the human race. That's what the Bible talks about. There is an important element to this that I want to introduce tonight. Before we get there, we'll deal with some deceptions that I believe are destroying the church today. And I believe in particular they are destroying the body of Christ in Hollywood. Please turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 14. We'll start there. 1 Corinthians 10:14. And I am reading, for those of you who are interested, from the New King James Version. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 14. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? For we, though many, are one bread and one body, for we all partake of that one bread. Observe Israel after the flesh. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? What am I saying then? That an idol is anything, or what is offered to idols is anything? Rather, that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table, the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than He? St. Paul and all of the apostles were very concerned about idolatry in the church. The question is, and certainly it's one for us tonight, was that just a first century phenomenon? Big temples, huge statues, the pageantry and the allure of ancient paganism? Or is it just as serious a problem for us, though perhaps today it takes a new form? What will it be like in the future when I believe the old gods are going to return? Please turn to Revelation chapter 2, verse 12. This is one of the letters, what are called the letters to the seven churches. And to the angel of the church in Pergamos write, These things says he who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. And you hold fast to my name and did not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas, my faithful martyr, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put stumbling blocks before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality. Thus you have also those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Repent, or else I will come to you quickly and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat, and I will give him a white stone, and on that stone a new name written which no one knows except him who receives it. This is one of 7 messages sent by Jesus, the resurrected and conquering King, to 7 churches of Asia Minor in the Roman Empire. Each message is filled with information. I believe that the letter to the church of Pergamos in particular is especially relevant to those who live and work in the kingdom of Hollywood. And this letter also relates to things we have talked about before. Pergamos was a provincial capital. The governor had been given the sword of authority by Rome. That meant that he had the power of life and death over every citizen. And this was a frightening power because the governor used it. And if the governor of Pergamos condemned you, you didn't have 20 years of legal appeals before you were executed, and death could come very, very painfully. So the first issue that this message deals with is one of authority. Jesus begins by saying, I am the ruler who has the ultimate power of life and death. The double-edged sword of eternity is in my hand. Remember what he taught his disciples when he walked this earth. In Matthew 10:28, he said, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." And here in Revelation, Jesus says, "I am that one." Then he goes on to make another startling statement. "I know your works, where you dwell, where Satan's throne is." You know, if you had visited Pergamos at the end of the 1st century A.D., when this letter was written, you would have seen a magnificent city. And you could have seen it from quite a distance away. Most Roman cities of Asia Minor were built around a hill or acropolis. On the top of that hill would be a grand temple dedicated to the god or goddess who was the patron of that city. The rest of the city proper would be spread out around the bottom of the hill. That wasn't the way it was at Pergamos. At Pergamos, the entire city was built around the top of a great cone-shaped hill. And everyone who traveled across the plain toward it, they could see it and they were impressed. It was beautiful and it just reeked of authority. Pergamos was a sophisticated cultural and political center. At the heart of the city, on the pinnacle of the hill, was an impressive temple to Zeus, the father of the gods. In front of it stood a huge 40-foot-tall altar that looked exactly like a throne. So at the beginning of this letter, I believe that Jesus is making a clear statement about the entire pantheon of ancient gods. The father of them all is really Satan. If that's so, what does it say about the rest of these so-called deities? As Paul says, the statues themselves are nothing. They're just carved stone. But the sacrifices made to them are made to evil spirits. There's something else that Jesus' statement implies. It implies that there are specific cities in this world where Satan and his lords of darkness maintain a unique and powerful presence. They are very concerned about controlling what goes on in those locations. You could say that such cities are centers of infection. You know, many times when we have an infection in our bodies, there's a core location for where it is all flowing out from, and so it is with supernatural infection, the infection of evil. A great deal of it flows from specific cities where Satan maintains a special presence. In those cities, hell has established a powerful gateway. But what did Jesus say about his church? He said that the gates of hell would not stand against it. If ever there was a city where Satan maintains a throne and a special gateway, I believe it's right here in Hollywood. In the production and mainstreaming of pornography alone, it's a world capital. And that's only the beginning of the darkness that flows here. And remember, I'm not speaking as someone who is on the outside. I've spent years on the inside in Hollywood as a showrunner, as a writer, as a producer. I know this industry. So a question. Was Jesus speaking the truth? If so, why are the gates of hell standing so strongly against the Church of Jesus Christ in this city and the entertainment industry? And there's plenty of evidence that they are. Perhaps part of the answer is in Pergamos, because it appears that the gates of hell were standing somewhat against them too. In Pergamos, there were two correlated philosophies that were destroying the spiritual power of the church. And they are still with us today. Pergamos, and a city just 30 miles away from Pergamos, called Thyatira, were trade guild cities. If you were going to be successful in any area of business, if you wanted a career, you had to be a member of one of these trade guilds. Does that remind you a little bit of Hollywood? Oh, yes. So that was the way it was. The guilds controlled everything as far as commerce and careers were concerned. The problem was that the guild meetings were focused on sacrifices to the gods, to drinking, and to sexual immorality. All of that was bound up together. Now, a Christian had to deal with that binding up of all these things. What was he or she to do? If you wanted a successful business, or even if you just wanted to make a living. There were serious choices to make. But it wasn't just choices about the success of your career. In Pergamos, there was a far more dangerous problem. Besides the temple of Zeus, there was a temple to the godhood of Caesar. Pergamos was a center of emperor worship. On a regular basis, every resident of that city had to enter the temple, bow down, and offer incense. Worshipping Caesar as Lord and God was a pledge of allegiance. It was a civic duty. If you refused to do it, you were considered a traitor, and you could face execution. To be a Christian in Pergamos meant that it wasn't just your livelihood that was at stake. Depending on your choices, it could be your life. There were two factions in the church at Pergamos, with two very different ways of dealing with these crisis issues. One group took what we might call a more Gnostic approach. They said, look, the body really doesn't matter. It's temporal. It's just passing away. It's what you do with your mind and your spirit that counts. So join in with the guild, do what they do. It's just your physical body. And as far as sacrificing to Caesar or any other god, toss a little incense and bow down for a moment. You won't be worshiping in your mind. Get it over with and go about your life as a Christian. These are not issues to lose your career or die over. The second group said, no, we can't do what the guilds do. We can't sacrifice to Caesar or any other god because there can't be two lords in our lives. There's no small or unimportant act when it comes to worship and obedience. We will not worship a false god even if we die. Through the history of the early church, many Christians died because of that stand. The first group was following two correlated doctrines that Jesus talks about in the letter, the doctrine of Balaam and the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. They were philosophies of spiritual compromise. Do whatever you have to do to live successfully in your culture. The end justifies the means. And Jesus says that he hates those doctrines. He speaks of a man named Antipas, calls him my faithful martyr. You know, this word martyr is an interesting word. In Greek, it is the word martus, and originally it simply meant witness. What is a witness? A witness goes into a court and tells what he knows. But over time, so many Christians gave a faithful witness and died for what they believed and for what they said, that the word came to mean dying unjustly for what you believe. Hand in hand with the doctrine of the Nicolaitans was a philosophy that Jesus calls the doctrine of Balaam. You remember the story of Balaam? It's found in Numbers 22 and 23. The children of Israel are about to enter the promised land. A pagan king hires the prophet Balaam to come and curse them. But God won't let him do it. Over and over, he tries to curse them, and God forces him to bless them instead. It was an unbelievably frustrating thing. So Balaam, trying to earn his pay, gives this king a strategy to defeat the Israelites. He tells him, if you want to destroy the people of God, get them to worship other gods, and the way to do that is through sex. Get them to sleep with your beautiful women, and through that means lure them into worshiping your gods. Yahweh will be so angry with them that he'll destroy them himself. Last month, we talked about temple prostitution. It began in ancient Babylon. And through all of history, so much of the worship of pagan deities has been bound up with sex. The lords of darkness know that what controls your sexual life controls your spiritual life. That's why they work so hard to enslave people in this area. Illicit sex, sex outside of marriage between a man and a woman, is the road to many forms of idolatry. It's the destroyer of true, powerful faith in God. Why is this so? Jesus said in Matthew 6:24 that no man can serve two masters. If you try it, you will wind up hating one of them. In sexual sin, our own desire has become our little god. We've placed the worship of that little god above the God of heaven and fellowship with him. We're willing to disobey God's laws to satisfy our desires. And that has always been the heart of idolatry. It's common knowledge that our churches today are filled with sexual immorality. The doctrine of Balaam, as it is expressed today, has created a whole class of semi-Christianized neo-pagans. Recently, I read a study about a whole generation of Christian New Agers that is rising up. Christian New Agers within the church. Now, Hollywood has played a huge part in the dissemination of a kind of sexual theology. Promiscuity and the universalism of the New Age religions of today go hand in hand. And the church has bought into it. Those of us who work in Hollywood know the truth, don't we? Sexual theology of the entertainment business destroys the lives of the very people who disseminate it. In this industry, marriages are dying every day because of immorality. Families are crushed. Hearts are broken. The tabloids are built on such stories, and they are only the tip of a really foul iceberg. Yet the lies continue, carefully woven into creative, funny, and emotionally involving stories seen around the world every day. Their greatest impact is on young people. In the middle of a terrible tragedy, experts report that sexually transmitted disease is at astounding pandemic levels. But I'm here to tell you that it's the sexually transmitted disease of the spirit that is sending souls into hell. The latest statistics are clear. Young people are leaving the church and the Christian faith in droves. Why? In so many cases, it's because they want to live the life that Hollywood has taught them, and they don't like what the Bible has to say about it. They have chosen to serve a different God. Balaam's strategy still works. My friends, judgment is coming. You know, I say this not as someone who is standing on the outside throwing stones at Hollywood. I'm a person of Hollywood. You know, I've been through many things in this industry. I can honestly say I've done my own little share of suffering in this industry. I will tell you that there is a terrible judgment coming on Hollywood. God forbid that any Christian should be involved in helping disseminate Balaam's doctrine of hell. But sexual immorality is not the only road to compromise and personal idolatry. There are other gods to serve than the gods of sex. Let me tell you a secret. Do you know that I can pray my way right into being a Nicolaitan? Myself, me. I'm really good at it. I've done it. From personal experience, I want to tell you how to become a Nicolaitan. Here's how it works. Something is put in front of me that I really want. It's an opportunity. That's the way it always is presented. In fact, it's clear that I really need this opportunity. I need it. Almost always it has to do with success and money. As I examine this opportunity, there are things that I don't like about it. In fact, there are some really stinky little issues that I know are seriously wrong, and they do disturb me. There is this little voice in my head that says, do you really think you should be involved in this? Now, I am very good at argumentation. So just for the purpose of fairness, I come up with a whole slew of excellent reasons why I should do it, why it's even probably the right thing to do. I mean, it's even serving God to do it. And then because I am a truly spiritual man, I enter into a time of prayer about the whole thing. Maybe even I fast about it. I mean, I'm really serious. And I may even ask all of my friends to fast and pray with me about this opportunity. Because I truly want the guidance of God in my life. What all of that is a big pile of hoo-ha. One time when I did this, I even went away for a whole day to pray and seek God's face. That day, I prayed myself right into making a sinful, destructive choice. And then when it turned out hideously, of course, I was rather angry at God about all of it. I just asked, why didn't He stop me? As I wallow in self-pity, I have a vested interest in proving that I'm really suffering for Jesus' sake. You know, that's what it's really about. After all, I was just following the Lord. And look what He did to me. Look what happened. That is all a puking fake. Every bit of it. And I'm firmly able to do this, and I have done it in my own life. The truth is that I was praying to myself. I was my own little Jesus. The Jesus Coleman idol. Look, you know, there are a lot of things in this world, and I have certainly hit a number of them. We don't need to ask God whether we should do them or not. They are called temptations. Now, on the surface, they all look very sweet, or they have a lot of sweetness about them. You know, if sin tasted awful, all of us would be saints, right? We would never sin. I certainly wouldn't. To say no to temptation will always cost you something. But to say yes to it will cost you far more. Far more. Sadly, today in Hollywood, in this kingdom, just as in Pergamos, it appears that there are two groups of Christians. One group says, you're not here to preach, just do your job. Do whatever you have to do to advance your career. Be a Christian, but don't make an issue about it. Carefully divide your life into well-managed compartments. Let's be honest. This is worshiping yourself and your own desires. It is Nicolaitanism. It's that kind of idolatry. As you live this way, I will tell you something, because I can tell you this more and more from personal experience. I've been there too. The more you live this way, the more and more your actions and choices will be exactly the same as the lost people who are around you who are so destructive. Step by step, you will become desensitized to the truth until anything you desire must be God's will. I've seen the result of this on many levels. A few years ago, I met with a very wealthy man. For years, very ostentatiously, he has proclaimed himself to be a Christian. Yet he boasted to me that there were over 20 people who were suing him because of his slick dealings. He was proud of it. He's wealthy in money, but he is not wealthy in a witness for the Lord. 10 years ago, I was brought in by a group of Christians who had the rights to do a best-selling series of books and make them into a TV series. They wanted me to turn them into a TV series, and that's what I've done in the past. I've created series, but one of the authors sued this group. Christians suing Christians. As disobedient to the Bible as you can get. This man played the Nicolaitan game, and he is a prominent Bible teacher. His suit went on for years. Millions and millions of dollars were spent, and ultimately and predictably he lost. In the process, he dragged the name of Jesus through the dirt in Hollywood because so many people read about it in the trades. This is the doctrine of the Nicolaitans at work. Compromise what you know is right to get what you want at all costs and then justify your actions. Certainly this doesn't happen just in the entertainment business. Lethal compromise, immorality, the idolatrous worship of self, the doctrine of Balaam, the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, these are very large reasons, in my opinion, why the church is failing in the kingdom of Hollywood and why it is failing throughout our culture. Christians in Pergamos didn't face a life and death test every day, did they? When that test came, they knew it. Their response to the huge test was determined by 100 responses to smaller tests. And so it is with all of us. The temple of Zeus and its throne altar, the trade guilds and their sacred debauchery, the temple to Caesar where life and death tests were held, all of that was part of Satan's throne. But there was a third center at Pergamos that was vital to that evil authority. Pergamos was a center of supernatural healing. Out from it flowed an enslaving darkness that has polluted the world down to our day. And I believe that understanding what happened in Pergamos will help us prepare for what is yet to come. In Pergamos, there was a world-renowned temple complex dedicated to the god Asclepius. Who was Asclepius? He was the pagan god of healing. To the Greeks and the Romans who worshipped him, he was half a god at birth, the son of Apollo by a human woman. At death, he became a full god. When you see statues of him today, you see him standing holding a staff, and around that staff are coiled either one or two serpents. The staff and the coiled serpents are still with us as a medical symbol. They do not represent the brass serpent that Moses raised in the wilderness. They represent the pagan god, Asclepius. Asclepius is almost forgotten today. But in the early centuries of our era, it was an entirely different story. In their little-known but classic book published by Johns Hopkins Press, entitled Asclepius, a collection of the interpretation of the testimonies, authors E. and L. Edelstein make this statement. The worship of Asclepius came to play such a vital role in the religious life of later centuries in the final stages of paganism that of all the genuinely Greek gods, Asclepius was judged the foremost antagonist to Christ. For Christians in the early centuries, the cult of Asclepius was a thorn in the flesh. Justin Martyr, a great Christian apologist of the 2nd century, stated that every time he talked with people about Jesus healing the sick and raising the dead, his hearers counted with Asclepius. Whole cities such as Epidaurus and, of course, Pergamos were dedicated centers to this god. Asclepius was the great supernatural healer who founded all the medical arts. His appeal was to the poor and sick who were so desperate. Across the Roman world, they flocked to his shrines. And his shrines were beautiful, let me tell you. They were restful places of escape. All were carefully constructed and maintained to display a veneer of loveliness that literally camouflaged the horror that was underneath them. Under the buildings, there was ugliness. The temples of Asclepius were built above tunnels and labyrinths, crawling with sacred snakes, the symbol and servants of the god. The shrines were tourist attractions. People from all over the empire came to walk through the landscaped grounds and lovely groves of cypress trees. Visitors cleansed themselves in the sacred baths, the medicinal baths. Then they offered sacrifices on the great altars that stood beneath the open sky. No place could have looked less like Satan's throne than one of these. Each shrine had its own character, with libraries and theaters and gymnasiums. But all the shrines were the same in one way. All had strange temples lined with couches. To go to Asclepius was to find yourself in a combination cathedral, hospital, spa that offered the promise of miraculous healing. What would happen if you came to Asclepius for healing? First, you would place yourself under the care of a priest-physician who would listen to the facts of your case. You would then be ordered to worship and make a sacrifice to the healing God. In the evening, you would be given a draught of wine, and then you would go and sleep on one of the many couches in the sanctuary. It was during this period of temple sleep called incubation that most healings would take place. Were actual physical healings accomplished in the shrines of Asclepius? The archaeological evidence is fascinating. In my opinion, there is good reason to believe that indeed real healings did occur. A record of some of them has been preserved in the form of stone tablets that have been found along a temple wall in Epidaurus in southern Greece. Very likely these tablets are only a small portion, many more that once existed. On them are personal testimonies to the power of the shrines. Imagine that you're a sufferer. Night has come, and you're lying on a couch in the temple. There are many other sufferers on couches around you. All are very ill. Some are groaning in agony. The only light is from a few dim lamps. In spite of the disturbing sounds, the strangeness in your own pain, the draught of wine helps you fall asleep. Your healing begins with a dream. Sometimes in such dreams, the God himself appears. He looks like a bearded, scholarly man, the personification of the ideal physician. There's an odd, faraway look in his eyes. He knows all the details about your case. Often Asclepius did things that cured people right there in the dream. The following are representative excerpts from some of those tablets. Euhippus. For 6 years he suffered with the point of a spear embedded in his jaw. In the temple he dreamed that Asclepius removed it and placed it in his hands. The next day he went away healed, carrying the spear point. The man of Tyrone. He came to the temple after having drunk a potion given to him by his stepmother. She had tricked him and placed live leeches in the drink, which were living inside him. Sweet family, he dreamed that Asclepius cut open his chest with a knife, took out the leeches, and placed them in his hands. At daybreak, he left cured the leeches out of his body. The mother of a woman suffering from dropsy, that is a swelling caused by accumulation of excess fluid. The woman dreamed that the god cut off her daughter's head, who was the sufferer, and emptied out the diseased fluid, and then replaced the head. When she went home, she found her daughter well. On the same night, her daughter had had the same dream. Aristogora, she had a tapeworm in her belly. She dreamed that Asclepius cut her open, cut the worm out, and closed her up. She became well. Some people didn't dream of the god himself, but one of his servants. A man with a cancerous sore on his foot went to sleep, and while he was sleeping, one of the sacred snakes crept out and licked it. The next morning he was healed after having dreamed that a handsome young man had placed a drug on the wound. Sometimes the healing wouldn't come out right. Asclepius would prescribe a regimen to follow. One man came to the temple coughing blood. Asclepius told him to eat pork every day for the rest of his life, constantly gorging himself on it. He was healed, but for the rest of his life he gorged himself on pork. He was terrified, believing that if he stopped eating pork for a single day, the disease would return. And on the testimonies go. Was everyone cured? No, I'm sure not. But enough experienced something unusual to bring people back. And they came by the thousands over centuries. In their desperation, all were locked into the worship of a false god, a manifestation of the great Lord of darkness. And that is the point. When the lords of darkness heal you, it means that you belong to them. As Christianity grew, the shrines slowly faded away. But the power did not fade. It simply found new names and new centers. After Rome was Christianized under Constantine in 313 AD, the temple of Asclepius on the Tiber River became the Church of St. Bartholomew, and the whole temple sleep routine continued, just with new priests and a new name for the god. Martin of Tours in the 6th century records examples of church sleep in temples in France to get healings. What we might call the cult of spirit healing has been active around the world since ancient Babylon. Many, many pagan deities in the past, in countless cultures over millennia, have been associated with supernatural healing. For instance, one of the chief goddesses of supernatural healing in all of the past, and still today in many places, is Isis. She was a goddess of healing. People came and slept in her temples. Next month, we're going to talk about some very strange, dark miracles of healing that people are claiming today. I believe the ancient cult of satanic healing is at work even in the Christian church. Any miraculous manifestation that does not lift up and glorify Jesus Christ as Savior, Lord, and King, any manifestation that glorifies humans, angels, or any other entity, any manifestation that finds its power outside the shed blood of Jesus Christ on the cross, is from the lords of darkness, no matter how beautiful it appears. Jesus was walking this earth. Why did people flock to him by the thousands? Well, principally, they came because they were suffering, were desperate for help. So what can we expect in the future? In Matthew 24:24, Jesus spoke these words about the end of days. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Now, these false Christs and false prophets, what kind of great signs and wonders will they be doing? Why will people flock to them? They flocked to Jesus because they were suffering and had nowhere to go. And I believe that so it will be at the end. How can we prepare for the days to come? Do not allow yourself to be enslaved by idols. And the greatest idol of all is just simply yourself. Again and again in the letters to the 7 churches, Jesus talks about overcomers. People who are not enslaved by the god of this world. For those who overcome, there's going to be a great reward in the kingdom of heaven. We're going to talk much more about that in the months ahead.
Working as a creative person in any endeavor is not easy. If we can be of help to you, contact us in the comments section. Also, please do like and subscribe.